This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends. The date is August the 13th, 1971, and we're visiting with Colonel Martin Hagerstrand. That's Hagerstrand. At Tsa La Gi, which is the Cherokee National Historical Society and also the scene of the famous Cherokee pageant, the Trail of Tears. We recorded and saw the Trail of Tears last night. We're talking today with the man who organized this Cherokee Historical Society and who is the director of the society and of the oversees the Trail of Tears drama. Colonel Hagerstrand, I wonder to begin with, we have an earlier interview with you which gives the build-up to the organization of the Cherokee Historical Society. Why don't you tell us what has happened in the past 3 years or whatever it is since this organization began in this location?
Thank you, Mr. Woods. The organization has made a great deal of progress in these 3 years, or actually it's about 4 years since I think I was interviewed last by Mr. Fields. First place, the village is progressing nicely. We should reach, from an economic point of view, a break-even point probably this year. However, the real impact of the village has been to send people back to their history books to get a more accurate picture of the heritage of the Cherokee Tribe. I think this has been had a real salutary effect both on the tribe and upon the area surrounding us here. By the emphasis on history, we have, I think, pinpointed the one of our major potential developments here in this particular area, for it is rich in lore and rich in heritage. And the Cherokee Tribe has always been an interesting and fascinating heritage. I think this has been developed, or that is, the story of this has been developed partly through the contributions of the village at Tsa La Gi, which, as you know, is an ancient recreation of Cherokee Village, not from this area, but from the Appalachian Highland home, the original homeland of the Cherokees. Since that time, persons from every state in the nation have seen this every year. We've had registrants at the village from every state. We have reached a total of 69 foreign countries that have just signed our little informal register at the ticket office there. As a general rule, we have about 27, 28, 29 foreign countries per year. And of course, many of them are repeats. We have standard visitors every year from England and France and most of the European countries. We pick up some of the exotic countries like Ghana and Tanganyika and other places on a perhaps a once basis. But it has been a very interesting experience, and it's a challenging experience to retain the ancient flavor of the village rather than to permit it to develop along more commercial lines. This, I'm sure, has hurt us a little bit financially because it isn't the spectacular type of thing that people associate now through their television understanding of the American Indian. But it is an educational project, and we've had thousands of school children come through, and hopefully they have had a better visualization of how the American Indian lived and sustained himself in his own environment, out of his own environment. This, of course, is one of the prime purposes of this particular project within Tsa La Gi, or the Cherokee Cultural Center. The second phase of the center, the drama, The Trail of Tears, has been presented now for 3 seasons. This is at the latter half of the 3rd season. This has also, I think, had a terrific impact on the understanding of the heritage of the Cherokee Tribe initially, and then expanding from that into the origins of Oklahoma and the basis for our present structure here, in particular this part of Oklahoma, which has such a great background resulting from the Cherokee Nation development here before Oklahoma became a state. And of course, this is the basis for this historical drama. I think that I may have mentioned in the previous recording that the initiation of this resulted from a visit of a group of businessmen to Cherokee, North Carolina, where a companion drama, Unto These Hills, on the Cherokee Reservation at Cherokee, North Carolina, has been very, very successful. And these businessmen conceived the idea of transferring that drama to Oklahoma and presenting it here. To go back very, very briefly, nothing happened from this attempt because it got involved in a matter of trying to locate someplace, and different people wanted wanted it in different places and had different conceptions of what it was and what it should be. When we contacted Dr. Kermit Hunter, who's a very famous American playwright who's had more plays produced than any other American playwright, we were interested, of course, in a different drama. Dr. Hunter, as the author of Unto These Hills, had done a considerable amount of research into Cherokee history, and to us was the logical person to follow through on the continuation of that history and drama form. And The Trail of Tears, as a drama, is the outgrowth of these early conversations with Dr. Hunter. Our first contact, my first contact with Dr. Hunter was in 1961, when we began an exchange of correspondence to work with it, although he had been contacted prior to that time by this same group of individuals. When we began the overall concept here, it was obvious that a theater would be required that had some unique characteristics. We felt that we needed to develop a physical structure that contained all of the requirements for theater, would be attractive to the eye, would attract the public as an architectural feature, and at the same time would produce the technical characteristics that were needed for the production of a first-class, full-scale drama. A young architect was contacted for this. He had been interested in development of the cultural center as a memorial to the Cherokee Tribe, but shifted gears a little bit and shifted direction when we discussed our problems and program with him. Charles Chief Boyd, who is of slight Cherokee blood, had conceived of a project for the Cherokees as a project in architectural school. And when we discussed with him the need for a theater and the things that we needed from our viewpoint, he began to visit theaters across the country. He and I took several tours around, and over the years, personally, I had visited a number of the outdoor theaters, so I had some concept of what was needed, but of course nothing that like you gain from experience later after you're working with them. Chief Boyd, we call him Chief, came up with a delightful and most useful and most beautiful theater structure. It has been extremely satisfactory. The acoustics are magnificent. The sound carries throughout the theater. The sight lines are similar to those in the famed old Greek theaters that had such wonderful facilities. In fact, we studied the Greek theater structures during our preliminary discussions on theater structure. The actual area required something that would be pleasing to the eye as well as functionally satisfactory. And Chief came up with some very interesting ideas that related to the Indian culture at the same time were functionally useful for our theater production. As a result, the theater at Tsa La Gi has been acclaimed nationally by many experts as perhaps the most beautiful outdoor theater in the nation. In addition, it has been cited by the American Institute of Architects for its unique design, and we think that this, of course, is a great accomplishment. The play itself has been a developing type of thing. It tells the story of the Cherokees in Indian Territory. The prologue of the play is designed to bring the visitor into the point of history where the Cherokees begin functioning as a nation in Indian Territory. The prologue has changed each year. The first year was a rather simple entrance or introduction. The second year, a much more involved introduction, which played a little bit more heavily on the initial problems of the Cherokees prior to their starting out over the Trail of Tears from their eastern highland homeland into Indian Territory. This year, it's a modification of these two with a little shorter time element, and the introduction is essentially by a narrator who is a principal character in the play. Experience-wise, we have learned that the public likes certain things about the play, and of course the playwright has rewritten portions of the play each of these 3 years to tighten up the connections between the various scenes, to provide for better continuity and better understanding. We've added a little spectacle each year that I think has enhanced the play. The choreography has changed each year, and all told, we think that this is a good process because, as should be the case with all operations of this type, we need to improve and to change and to make it just a better story as well as better entertainment for the general public. The 1969 production, in terms of artistic integrity, was sensitive, well received. It had some shortcomings, as all new plays do. The 1970 production improved on those features and developed the strong points and trimmed out some of the weaker things. I think our cast was a little better selected in 1970. In 1971, however, I think there's been a quantum jump in the performance, in that the rewriting of the play has tightened it up considerably, and a considerable amount of spectacle has been added that the public seems to like very much. But in addition to that, the sensitivity of the play as a vehicle for conducting the story of telling the story of the Cherokees, I think has been enhanced through the rewriting, and naturally people, when they're pleased, why they're more likely to understand and to accept the play itself. The first year our attendance was sparse. We have a very limited advertising budget compared to most of the outdoor dramas. The second year, we had approximately a 40% increase over 1969, and this year we're enjoying a substantial increase over that. During the month, through the month of July, we had a 43% increase, and for the first 10 days of August, our attendance jumped over 60% over the corresponding period the year before. There are a number of impacts from this. First, the impact on our own local people in terms of the enhancement of the tourist understanding. Most of us are tourists at heart. We travel around the countryside, but we neglect those things that are right at home. I think we have convinced some of the people of the immediate area that there are many things useful right around here in northeast Oklahoma that are worth seeing and that should be seen, and our own people have begun to understand the value of the tourist business, the visitor business. Another impact, of course, has been the economic impact. Last year, in a study in a very conservative, using very conservative figures, we developed an economic impact of over $8.5 million on this area of Oklahoma. This is using the standard factors for the multiplication of dollars that are brought into the area by visitors who during the summer tend to spend a substantial amount per day, as well as to using the turnover factor of money. It's usually accepted a turnover of 7 times before it begins to leave an area. This year, using those same factors, I'm sure we'll come up with a much greater impact, because we have already reached the attendance point that we got all year last year, and we still have good 2 weeks to go. So I think that the economic impact will gradually be understood and accepted. But I think there's been another impact that it's a little difficult to assess. And this is the stimulation of interest in the history of the Cherokees on the part of the Cherokees themselves. One of the purposes of our particular project here is to stimulate pride in heritage on the part of the Cherokee people. And I think we have had this result. I see it in various places. The Cherokee history is a fascinating history, and a knowledge of this history and an understanding of this history on the part of the Cherokee people themselves cannot help but make them proud and therefore stimulate their increased understanding of their own background and take a pride in this background. We see several evidences of this. There's certainly a resurgence of interest. Our correspondence tells us this, as well as what we have heard from all kinds of people scattered across the world. We get letters from people all over the United States, Cherokees as well as non-Cherokees, who tell us about their understanding of the history and how much it has done for them. I think this is a very important result from this kind of activity. So we're most pleased with it. Of course, the economic impact amongst the Cherokees themselves has been substantial in that we employ Cherokees to the extent that we can throughout our project here. The drama this past year has been about 60% Cherokee as far as the cast is concerned, and it's 100% Cherokee with a few exceptions like myself insofar as the staff of the theater itself is the mechanical staff, the ushers, the cashiers, things like this concerned. So we think that this has certainly had a direct impact on Cherokee employment in the area. But there's also an indirect impact economically Our motels are full all of the time during this latter part of the summer season. We're attracting many, many people into the area from all over the United States, and they buy gasoline and they buy tires and they eat at restaurants and things like that. And naturally, during the summer season, the various businesses put on additional help. Since much of our labor in the area is of Cherokee origin, we think that this has proved to be an indirect benefit. At least we hope so, and this is part of the basis for our existence. The question has been raised about the production itself. Each year, we select the cast from publicly announced auditions. We announce these auditions throughout all the schools and colleges in the area. The television stations, radio stations, and newspapers have been most helpful in announcing these and getting the word out. And at a given time, the director, who also acts as the casting director for the show, comes in and auditions all of these applicants. The competition this year was good. We had the first year we had a little bit of a problem from local applicants. We had very few. The second year we had more. This year we had over 200 people who tried out for the few speaking parts in the play and the dancers. And so many of our cast members this year come from the local area. By local area, I'm talking about northeast Oklahoma area, with perhaps the largest single block coming from Northeastern State College here, because the drama department there has been encouraging this kind of development, and this, as far as we're concerned, is a plus factor, provided, of course, we can get the quality that we're interested in, because we do want to continue a professionally developed and professional presentation, and to do this requires a certain number of very qualified actors, talented actors who are dedicated to theater. It's not an easy job to perform 6 nights a week, rain or shine, or hot weather and cool weather and so on, and continue the enthusiasm from the beginning right on up through the final performance on 29th of August this year. And it takes some pretty dedicated people to continue to put on a fresh show each night. The mechanics of the cast, of course, is simply that we assemble the cast around the 1st of June each year, as close to that as we can. It takes about 3 weeks to pull the cast together, to do the necessary stage work that's required, to do the blocking that is necessary to get people at the right place at the right time on stage, to get the dancers in shape. This is one of the real problems, and they have to work out like athletes, really, in order to be able to perform some of the gymnastic type spectacular dances that are included in the show. And it takes 2 or 3 weeks for them, after a year of being in school, to get back in physical shape again, so that they won't injure themselves as they go through these dances. So it takes just about the 3-week period, and we try to start the show on the last Friday in June, to give us a little bit of leeway to get all the costumes and everything put together. And we end the last Sunday in August, of course, in order to get the kids back into school again, because most of our cast are teachers or serious students of drama or dance. The costume preparation each year takes a substantial amount of time, because we make all of our own costumes. They're made locally by a team that we pull together beginning the latter part of May. Our costume designer, Wendell Cochran, is a very talented and creative young man who has done a marvelous job. This is his profession, and he knows the ropes and course, has been able to produce what I consider to be a very fine costume ensemble for the entire production. This is one of the spectacular things, I think, in the production, is this variety of costumes that we have. Incidentally, these costumes are basically authentic. When I say basically authentic, we don't use the same materials that they might have used, but they do use the same designs. And we've been challenged, for example, on some of the costumes that we used, but when you go back into history and look at what was actually used, there are sketches and drawings, and in some cases photographs. You find that these are accurate and that they certainly fit the period and the particular tribe involved. The mechanics of getting all of the stage props and things like that are taken care of by a stage crew. We've been very fortunate in having very good technical people who are interested and who work at this process. Many of them are locally trained people, and this certainly speaks well for the initial training that they received in the schools and colleges of the area. The question was asked, I think, about how we achieve some of the technical effects that we use. Well, of course, the lighting itself is a feature of outdoor drama because there is no curtain, such as you use to separate scenes in a normal operation. In outdoor drama, the curtain is the darkness, and the scenes are changed by shifting from one section to another using lighting to focus attention or spotlight attention on a particular activity going on. And while that's going on, they're setting the rest of the stage or another part of the stage someplace else for the next scene. And the lights shift, and that, in effect, becomes the curtain. We have about 75 lighting instruments in use now. We still need a few more, but these are adequate for our present presentation, and the technical crew certainly does a good job of switching them on. We have very sophisticated lighting equipment compared to many shows. At the time, it was the latest equipment available, and it is controlled from a control room high in the light gallery surrounding the theater, where they can see everything that goes on stage. And they operate, of course, from a series of prepared cues that have been agreed upon to get the best effect for the lighting. The other technical effects, of course, are designed primarily for sound, and I think that we certainly get the sound out of them. The Civil War scene, for example, involves the use of large cannon noises and powder explosions to produce both visual and sound effects. In the cannons themselves are actually 55-gallon drums sunk in the ground. There are 6 of them on each side of the theater, in the background behind the theater. We use approximately a fifth of a stick of dynamite with an electric blasting cap to set them off. These are controlled from the sound booth. They are coordinated with a smoke pot, as we call it, on stage, which is simply a little container in which we explode black powder to get both the flash and the visual effect and the smoke and the smell, see, which comes from the explosion of the black powder. So that whenever a cannon goes off in one of our barrels back behind stage, a smoke pot explodes on stage to give the visual effect and the also a little bit of a pop sound, and this constitutes the battle. The death dancer, who is a prominent figure in this play, because as the narrator states in the beginning that death is always with us, has a gleeful time during the Civil War scene, and it is his signal that sets off these explosions. I don't know whether the audience always catches this, but as he is doing his dance in amongst the performers on stage, he shakes his rattle at a particular person or in a particular area, and boom, the sound goes off, you see, and this person falls to the ground, so on, as a casualty of war. This is one of the technical effects that we use. Perhaps the other most complicated technical effect is in the final scene, the Phoenix Dance, where, of course, the various flames are coming out and dancing around the phoenix bird, you see. The dancers simulate these little pieces of flame and points of flame, and they carry with them streamers and scarves and so on, which are intended to suggest a flame effect. They carry a large sheet of cloth which they billow back and forth, you see, and the smoke and fire. But we also have two little fire-making machines, we call them that. They really don't make fire, but they are spotlights behind a red gel, as they're called, or screen. And we use a very simple little mechanical device that is found in many homes, the electric fan from a range hood. And that is connected to a pipe, a little 3-inch pipe, which has a series of holes punched in it. And those, there are a series of little plastic spear points, you might call them, that are strung in front of these little holes. And as the fan is turned on and the light is turned on, these little spear points, little plastic points, you see, make the variation in color. It's a variation in the flame on stage. And of course, the other effects are secured by just changes in lighting and things of that nature. That is pretty well the basis. I think that there are a number of values and lessons to be learned out of all of this. The first place, Oklahoma has a tremendous and fascinating Indian heritage. The more that is known about this heritage and the more that it's put in perspective and understood properly, the greater pride Oklahomans can take in this heritage. So it is, we have attempted to present this in such a way that Oklahomans, as well as the Cherokees themselves, can be proud of this background, or that it's put in perspective and understood properly, the greater pride Oklahomans can take in this heritage. So it is, we have attempted to present this in such a way that Oklahomans, as well as the Cherokees themselves, can be proud of this background, and we want to tell the world about it, and I think that we have spotlighted attention to some extent, or been instrumental in this, by the existence of the play and the performance. The economic benefits I mentioned to the area, these spill out over the entire state. We have focused attention on Oklahoma in other ways also. For example, the American Way, which is the American Airlines magazine found in every American Airlines seat across the nation. The American Way had a very interesting article about the Tsa La Gi in it, and it was a story of outdoor drama, but the Tsa La Gi and the Trail of Tears, the village, Tsa La Gi, took off one whole page out of a page-and-a-half article, so we considered our article. Also, the American Motorist, which is nationally distributed to all members of the American Automobile Association, had a featured article about Tsa La Gi. We've been featured on the Discovery program, which is a nationally syndicated ABC television program. This program was repeated twice. They claim to have somewhere between 7 to 9 million viewers. And this, I think, focused attention on Oklahoma. We were given honorable mention in a recent National Geographic article on Oklahoma. We had hoped for more, but it came out where we weren't ignored anyway. Plus the fact that we've been included in a number of roundups of, national roundups of outdoor drama as one of the major dramas in the area and in the country. We have some other things coming up that I think I haven't seen yet, but I understand that they're in the works that will also focus attention on Oklahoma as a result of this presentation.
Let me swing back and ask you a question about, you know, the phoenix appears in this, and of course the phoenix appears in, is a part of almost every major culture. Where did the Cherokee pick up the phoenix as a part of his culture?
Well, I really don't know. There's a, it goes back into legend and lore, and I don't know that anybody has identified any specific period of time when it appeared. But it has been, it's been repeated in the, all during the known Cherokee history.
You have no idea where it came from. Of course, the Oriental had it, the ancient Greeks had it. It's an interesting thing to have appeared in so many cultures.
Yes, it is. Of course, we're getting into a very fascinating area to me. This is research in the origins of the Cherokee Tribe. There have been a number of, I suppose you might call them speculations as to the origin of the Cherokee Tribe, based perhaps on the fact that so little is known about the early Cherokees. The first contact with the Cherokees was in the first white contact with Cherokees was 1540 when DeSoto came through the southeastern part of the United States. And the Jesuit historians who accompanied DeSoto wrote certain information which has been translated as applying to the Cherokee Tribe, what was then the Cherokee Tribe. There is nothing in the original Cherokee lore or legends that I know of that specifically says anything about their earliest history. There's their story of creation, of course, and there's their story of the eternal flame, where they got their fire, things of this nature. The story that they believed, in which they considered themselves the leading people, you see, because they were given certain rights and benefits and privileges and so on by the Great Spirit. The Delawares have in their Walamopum or talking sticks a hieroglyphic type of history that refers to a great battle between the Delawares and the Cherokees, wherein the Cherokees were forced into the Appalachian Highlands. There is some evidence that the Cherokees once occupied the area of northern Ohio, West Virginia, that general area there, and excavations have pretty well substantiated this claim. But there are scientists, particularly about the turn of the century, one scientist wrote persuasively that the Cherokees were originally a Caribbean Indian because of certain basketry designs and manufacturing methods and certain pottery designs and so on. Another scientist wrote, I believe he was a naturalist if I'm not mistaken, wrote that the Cherokees were without question one of the 12 lost tribes of Israel. So I really don't know where the Phoenix story crept in or how.
Why was this particular location selected for Tsa La Gi?
In reality, this is one of the most historic spots in the Cherokee Nation history because of the significance of what developed here. There remains just 200 yards from here 3 columns from the old Cherokee Female Seminary. This is all that's left of the very famous school system of the Cherokees, and we have used those 3 columns as a sort of a symbol of the Cherokee heritage. Cherokees were all interested in education, and they felt that the solution to their existence, along with the white man, their acculturization and so on, was education, and this was the basis for it. As a result, when they came over the Trail of Tears into Indian Territory, one of the first things they did after they created a nation was to create a public school system. And as early as December in 1839, they established a series of public schools throughout the Cherokee Nation area. When as they went on, they recognized that they were sending their young people away from the Cherokee Nation for higher education, beyond that of their basic elementary education, which extended about through perhaps what we would say the sixth grade today. In this process, they finally decided to establish seminaries, or what we would probably call them today, local junior colleges or something of this nature, for the higher education of their youth to keep them in the area. So in 1849, a school act was passed establishing, in 1846, a school act was passed establishing 2 seminaries for higher education. The higher education period at that time extended anything above about 6th grade, you see. In 1851, they opened these 2 seminaries, one at this location and one just about 3.5 miles, crow flies, northwest of here. And in these seminaries, they taught Greek and Latin and the arts, the sciences, as they were known, mathematics, English literature and language, and so on. It's fascinating schools, really. And they imported the teachers from the East in order to start this educational process. I said this was perhaps the most historic area to the Cherokees because it symbolized, in my mind, the intense desire of the Cherokee to acclimate himself into what was obviously a rapidly changing world. And this was their answer to it. And these old columns, in a unique sort of way, symbolize the rise and the decline of the Cherokee nation as a nation. Because when the Cherokee Seminary, the female seminary, burned in 1887, the Cherokee Tribe immediately set about rebuilding it, and Old Seminary Hall at Northeastern State College was opened in 1889 as the replacement for this old building that burned on this spot. So these columns remain as a symbol of the Cherokee effort to establish itself as an independent nation through education. And I think this is why I consider this to be one of the most hallowed spots in Cherokee history.
What about that 4th column?
Well, the 4th column is there. It will probably, and I use the term 3 columns all the time because very likely the 4th column will have to be moved or removed in order to make way for the planned Cherokee National Museum.
That's the next question I was going to ask you about. The planned museum. Tell us about that.
Included in the original plans for Tsa La Gi is a Cherokee National Museum and a Cherokee National Archives. Other things have been added to this concept since the original plan was adopted in 1965. But the museum is to be a professional, fully professional museum, not a roadside type log cabin thing. And we hope to cover periods of history that will not be covered by the village or by other exhibits or displays in the area. And of course, we expect to use all of the standard techniques of the museologist to present this story. We want it to be an educational institution for the education of the world at large, for the preservation of the evidence of the Cherokee history. And of course, you use artifacts and pictures and things like that to do that. But we also expect to use dioramas and things of this nature to tell the story. The Cherokee National Archives, the 4th phase in our original production, is, in my mind, the most unique of the entire complex. This is to be, again, a professional institution of unique architectural concept that will contain, if we can do it, everything that's been written about or by or for the Cherokee Tribe. you have to go back in history a little bit to understand why I consider this to be so challenging and so fascinating. The Cherokees were literate in their own language, and this is the result of the invention of the alphabet, or Cherokee syllabary, by the great Sequoyah. This not only produced a large volume of writings in Cherokee and in English and so on, but this drive to for education that I mentioned also produced a large body of writing. In addition, the Cherokees were of interest to the early English, Spanish, and French colonizers in this area because they were the most numerous tribe on the East Coast, as well as the most warlike. And each of these colonial powers sought the aid of the Cherokees in the support of their aims as a buffer against their enemies. So they wrote a great deal about them. And in 1730, for example, Sir Alexander Cumming, who was the Indian agent to North America, took a group of Cherokee chiefs back to the court of George II, and they stayed there for several months. And then a few years later, in 1762, I believe it was, another group of Cherokee chiefs went to see whether all these things that the original group said were true. They spent some time in England, and as a result of that, the British have a very large and valuable collection of early Cherokee material, both from developed by the Cherokees themselves, but also writings about the Cherokees. See. The Jesuit historians who came through the Southeast have material about the Cherokees. But all of this material is scattered worldwide. The Museum of the City of Milwaukee has a collection of Cherokee material. The Hay Foundation Museum of the American Indian in New York, the San Francisco Museum, and then, of course, local areas, Gilcrease and Philbrook and University of Oklahoma Library, all have substantive collections. Now, if a researcher was interested in any phase of in-depth research in any phase of Cherokee history or background, he has to go many, many different places to gather this material and to study it. Can you imagine the impact on research into Cherokee history if all of this matter were pulled together into one place? And all the Cherokee records were pulled together into one place. All the federal records, that is those of the tribe, are in federal archives, and they belong to the federal government, because when the nation was dissolved, the federal government became the trustee, as it were, of all of those records. We have had informal conversations to become a sub-depository for the official federal archives, and we're looking forward to this. So in our concept, we will provide one place for the collection of everything that's been written about the Cherokees and their background and immediate environment. Now, this has been made possible by microfilm, by these various techniques, facsimile techniques and so on, that weren't available a good many years ago. So this is a long-term project, but in my mind, a very fascinating project. Now, the building itself will be an architectural gem. It will be a concrete and steel version, appropriately decorated and so on, of an ancient seven-sided Cherokee council house. It'll be the largest structure in the complex and the tallest structure in the complex. It will have the eternal flame burning from the apex of this council house, and we'll have offices underneath the main. It'll be built on a hill, a mound of earth, such as the old council houses were actually built on. And then all of our offices and so on will be in the first floor of the museum, or the archive structure, you see. Since those two buildings were conceived, we've added some other things to our long-range planning. One is a rural Cherokee village of a few log cabins, a log school, we have an old frame church that we've located, all of which were built prior to the turn of the century. We expect to bring those in and set them up as a little village. Now, they'll be a little closer together, perhaps, than they would have originally, but we want to outfit them and populate these houses and so on, just as they would have been perhaps of the 1875 to 1890 period. We also have started work in the planning area on an arboretum and herbarium, which will surround the theater here, taking in the area around. I might call it a mini arboretum and mini herbarium because it won't be cover a great deal of ground. But we hope to provide, or to at least provide specimen plantings of some of the 800, or most of the 800 herbs and plants that were used by the Cherokees for either food or fiber or medicines and so on. We think this is a very challenging project also, and people are doing research on this now. We expect to get some additional help on this. We have some other things in the wind also, but those are the principal ones.
Talk about your Cherokee Hall of Fame. I know you had Robert Owen. Tell about it.
The Cherokee Hall of Fame is a program to memorialize Cherokees who have made outstanding national contributions. And I'm talking about national contribution now to the nation as a whole, not just to the Cherokee Nation. The technical concept is that of a plaza connected to the museum and surrounding the old columns, which will be tied in architecturally to the museum, and which will be located a number of monuments giving the principal facts about these individuals who are memorialized. Senator Robert L. Owen was the first entrant into this Cherokee Hall of Fame, not because of any particular sequence of time or anything like that, but because Senator Owen was the author, or co-author, but the principal author of the National Federal Reserve System, which we now operate under. And the Federal Reserve Board got concerned that nowhere was the originator of their own system memorialized. And so this led to conversations, and the Federal Reserve Board of the Bank of Kansas City in particular, Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, provided a monument along with the Cherokee Tribe and the Society for memorializing Senator Owen. The second person that is under active consideration and probably will materialize not too far distant future is Admiral Jocko J. Clark. I call it Jocko. He was known as Jocko because he was quite a bronco rider in the Western Pacific when he would take his warships on into very close to Japan and Korea during the Second World War and during the Korean War. He has been a member of our board of directors until his death in December. He is an author, has written a couple books on naval power, air power, and Navy, and there is an active effort now by members of the Clark family, as well as members of the Yorktown Association, to make him the second entry in the Cherokee National Hall of Fame. Now, the way this operates is a committee is set up to monitor the entries to determine who should be admitted to this Hall of Fame. It's not a selection process, really. It's a sort of a nomination thing, and then is the person of national stature or is not. And usually a sponsoring group has been identified for these. For example, a group is actively trying to collect funds for the memorialization of Sequoyah for his contribution to the Cherokee Nation, but as a spillover to the nation as a whole. Another group is working on Congressman W.W. Hastings for his contributions to Oklahoma and the nation. He's a Cherokee. And another group is taking on the job of Will Rogers. So we think that this can develop into a really fascinating memorial to great Cherokees.
This brings something else. This I might consider a commercial as far as we're concerned. But why don't you discuss the impact? We had Senator Owen as the principal speaker, which is a rather interesting thing at his own dedication. Why don't you talk a little about the impact of the voice on history, and from the standpoint of that, discuss that a little bit, and then what you feel is the value of the voices that are being provided that will be a part of your Cherokee archives that we're making today.
Yes, this is a very interesting approach. When we were considering the ceremony for the memorialization of Senator Owen, it developed that the Living Legends Library had at least 2 tapes of speeches that Senator Owen had made during his later years. And I believe the one that was used in the ceremony itself was made when he was 85 years old, I believe. He died at 91. This is a very unique experience. It really was. Here was a large and distinguished audience of people from the region. There were representatives from the Federal Reserve System here, from the tribe. There were bankers from all over the state in the area here. And part of the program was a rebroadcast of one of these speeches that the Living Legends Library had provided. It fit in so perfectly into the ceremony for the simple reason that we were tying together the accomplishments of a great Cherokee and a great American. And in Senator Owen's discussion, he gave tribute to his Cherokee heritage as a factor in his development through the years. It was certainly most appropriate and most apt for the ceremony. He competed on a most favorable basis with the active voices of Principal Chief Keeler and Mr. George Clay, who's president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. And the few minutes broadcast from his speech became the highlight, really, of the entire production. This whole field of oral history, I think, is gaining a substantial degree of importance, an increasing degree of importance, because it brings history alive, you see. These are real people who are talking, and these are people who are describing in their own words and perhaps halting fashion just exactly what has happened or what is happening. And I think, of course, that this gives a much greater understanding and greater visualization than you could by simply putting down the printed word, because the printed word is polished and honed and developed until, in my opinion, it often loses much of the meat. The spoken word, I think, gives the feeling of the individual. The descriptive passages are there that you really don't capture in the written word. I think another facet of the thing is more interesting to people. I'd much rather listen to a tape than to read the same material on a sheet of paper. And I don't know whether I'm unique or different, but I think this is generally true with most people. So the Oral History Project, such as exemplified by the Living Legends Library, is a tremendous contribution to the knowledge of the coming generations, the research into history and historical events, because they are described by people who were there. I think this is one of the great contributions. It's an unfortunate thing, I think, that we've neglected this, but I think possibly this is because the techniques for developing this have only come about in the last few years to a point where it makes it practicable.
Thank you very much. This has been an interview with Colonel Martin Hagerstrand, the founder and director of the Cherokee Historical Society. The date is August the 13th, 1971.